What's up, everyone? Linda Kee here, coming at you from Alexander Street Studios here on Treaty 7 territory, otherwise known as Wilkinses, Calgary, Alberta, where I am grateful to be living and creating. Today's special guest is local musician Marvin "The Fly" Kee, sharing all things funk.
Lately I've been trying to find my way to a place where life is more than empty space. Wondering where I belong, just don't fit in, 'cause I choose not to play along, no. Life is on for me. I got a new way, it's a new play. I got a one-way ticket to a brighter day.
So, okay, welcome. This episode, we're going to be talking about the influence of funk music, or funk as a cultural influence. I've invited my sibling, Marvin "The Fly" Kee, a local musician in Calgary, a big part of the music scene. I have 3 questions for you, Marv. So you can, tell us, a bit of your story. My first question is, do you have a memory of when you were first exposed to funk music?
Yes, I do. I do have a memory. I have a few memories. One was watching a movie called The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. It was a basketball movie. I saw it when I was 7, 8 years old, and it starred Dr. J, and the soundtrack was all funk, R&B, and soul music. And I was a basketball player then, so it resonated with me, basketball and funk combination.
And when you watched it, when you heard the sound of it, do you feel like, oh, that was the first time it was something new to you at that time?
Well, I've heard a lot of funk music growing up ever since I was a kid in the backseat of a car, starting with Earth, Wind, and Fire. And there was a genre back then called yacht rock, which was kind of funk.
And did you know about this when you were a kid, that yacht rock existed?
No, I didn't know the term yacht rock. I didn't even know what the term funk was. But that was my first introduction to funk music, was that movie, The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh.
Okay, cool. And it's about a basketball team?
Mm-hmm. And everyone on the team were astrologically Pisces.
Right, and you're also a Pisces.
Yes, and I'm a Pisces, and I play basketball, so I felt the vibration and I felt the funk, and you could hear the horns blasting through the whole soundtrack. Yeah,
can you talk a little bit about that? When you say you felt it, this podcast is about certain influences and what elements, what vibrations draw us to it. Can you recall, can you add a bit more about that feeling?
There were these keyboard sounds that I had discovered late in life, when I was in my 20s, and they were keyboards called Moogs and clavinets and Jupiters and Prophets, and
those are names of instruments? Whoa, I didn't know that.
That exist in the 70s, and I discovered the names because I would take samples of Stevie Wonder songs, and I would go up to musicians and ask them what makes this sound, and they would tell me that, oh, that's a Moog, Moog, and so that's what The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh possessed, was a lot of Moog, a lot of repetition of this guitar that was kind of stemmed from African rhythms, and the wah pedal sound, which gives you that wah 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 sound, and a lot of horns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, when you were a little kid, you heard the music, there's all kinds of genres of music, and the reason why I ask you specifically about funk is because I feel like it's kind of like this linchpin for you, that like you can go into like rock or into hip hop or all the different genres, soul and R&B and jazz. But I feel like after all these years, like funk's kind of been, I don't know, like how would you, because as I observe you, that's when I notice. So like, what is your connection? It's like, why funk?
I grew up in the 70s, so in the 70s there was a lot of funk in movie soundtracks, and I'm a cinephile of sorts, and I watched a lot of movies. Thanks to Mom took us to a lot of movies back then, and a lot of the soundtracks were funk music. Like if you listen to Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon, if you watch the movie, the whole soundtrack is funk. And all those genres that you mentioned, from hip hop to rock to R&B, soul, it all has funk in it, funk element.
They're all influenced by funk. Okay. So those
And also to mention, I mean, as strange as it sounds, in the 70s, porn music was actually, it was all funk.
And why as a musician, and like you mentioned, you're an artist, right? You love film, you love stories, books and stuff. Why do you imagine funk is used in those types of films?
Well, because funk has elements of drama, and it can be sexy. And like, for example, if you were to watch a love scene in a movie, would you listen to really harsh sounds, pounding metal sounds, or would you like to listen to something sexy in a love scene?
For sure, it has that kind of, there's a groove to it, there's a groove, and it's kind of a...
You want to hear harsh techno, repetitive techno while you're making love to a woman, or do you want something sexy and funky?
Fair enough. I mean, I love funk too. Okay, so what do you feel? Okay, so here's another thing. I feel like someone who doesn't know as much about music, or has a lot of experience with music as much as you do, I feel like it crosses all borders. Like you can be out somewhere, like, I don't know, like a hockey game or something, and like, or somewhere in public where there's a huge diverse set of people that they might not all be versed in funk, or they might like different types of music or lifestyles. But when you play something that's funky, everyone is like, do you notice everyone's like, oh, I know this jam,
Yeah, like celebrate good times,
yes,
or play that funky music, or Prince music, like you said.
Yeah. And why do you think it is that way?
Because funk has groove.
Yeah.
That makes you move.
Yes, that's so true.
Makes your ass move.
You know what? I love that you said that. It's like it makes you move. It's like it gives you permission to move, I feel. And I don't know what you think about it, but sometimes, we're not always connected to our bodies, but like it makes you move. It's like people, when I hear it, I see people's body language change. It's like, oh, I'm going to give myself permission to move in a certain way.
Like, I love Neil Young, but when you're in a disco, you want to hear Harvest Moon, unless it's I recently heard and now play a funk version of Harvest Moon, Neil Young.
Right, so that's like fusion. Mm-hmm. Cool. So the next thing for me is, as you learn more about funk, and what have you discovered in terms of, and you've mentioned it already, but what are some of the roots that you've learned about? Like, how deep do these funk roots go in terms of history or, lineage?
In the late 80s, early 90s, I used to play in a funk band called the High Rollers, and we would just try to discover where funk came from, and where it all began, and like reach out to the past. And we would buy these records for, like, at the time they were only $1 or $2, because anything with an afro in the late 80s early 90s was like considered like delete bin material, and usually if it had an afro on it, it would sell for $2, and so we would find these records.
Can I pause there? Why was that?
Times change, you know.
Like,
instruments
why do you think that was
change,
happening?
keyboards change, guitars change, hairstyles change, like clothes change.
But so you're saying that when you say it was in the delete bin, at the time that you were looking for music, it was considered, would you say, by mainstream people,
Dated.
unwanted?
It was dated.
Let's put that
Yeah,
aside.
no one likes
Okay.
disco anymore.
Oh, got you.
No one likes funk anymore,
Okay,
right?
got you.
Yeah, but the elders, they did that, and so us kids grew up and we're like, well, we don't like your music today, but we like this band called Sly and the Family Stone or Jimi Hendrix, and then you go further and you realize that there's this whole history that had been like kind of deleted, and funk was one of them that kind of got deleted.
And you were a teenager at this time? In the 80s, yeah, okay.
We were about 15, 16, and we were digging in the crates, in the vaults, and looking for old records, anything with an afro on it, and we found a whole universe. You also have to check the date as well, because around funk got up to about 1979, and then so when we hit into 1980, 81, 82, leading up to Prince in 84, those years, like especially 79, 80, 81, there was a shift into like funk became like disco, and the way funk was, if I could quote a funk god by the name of George Clinton, he described disco as making love with one stroke, and that was like because at the time the drugs had changed, cocaine came in, and it became a little bit more shallow and it lacked groove, and it was more of like this more machine-driven sounds than human soul sounds.
Interesting, got you, yeah. Cool. And so that's okay. So you're saying when you're looking through those records, that was like a clue that says
Yeah.
there's a clue that you're like, this record might bring me back to that era.
So anything previous to 1980 was considered, with an afro, was considered delete bin material, and now we would buy these records for $1 or $2. Now they're selling these records for $38.
It's like a revival, and it's kind of trendy, and people are mixing things in. I hear a lot of old funk music or soul, and I'm such a, I don't know a lot about new music, but I'll be like, oh, I know that sample, that's like an old song, but I won't know the new song. And then someone will be like, oh, I only know this song, I don't know the original you're talking about, you know?
Yeah. But if you fast forward into, say, like the mid-'80s, where a new generation of kids grew up, while that was happening, the kids were like, I'm going to take a group called the Red Hot Chili Peppers, which I got into, like, and they started in 1983, 84, just as disco died. They were more of a punk band, but they were fusing funk because they were doing what my old band did, the High Rollers, was dig deep into the past, and they found these hidden gems that inspired them, and no one at the time was listening to funk, and so they, in a way, they kind of revived funk, and these were white people, not afros, but bringing back funk with punk, fusing punk with it, and just brought it back, you know?
What did it mean to you, like on a personal level, in terms of music? Like, how has that played a role in your life and how you've grown as a person or changed, or
What do you mean?
how has funk music or music played a role in creating your character journey, I guess, learning about how we're all affected by it, because I feel like I think it's a universal thing. I really do,
Funk is a universal thing.
I feel like that.
Yeah. But it has its highs and lows. Like I said, there was a fusion into the 80s, even though there was a band called Chic that in the disco days were playing funk chords. And throughout my life, since sitting in the back seat of a car to watching that movie Fish at St. Pittsburgh, and listening to Earth, Wind and Fire, and discovering Jimi Hendrix, and then realizing there's a guy named Sly and the Family Stone who merged different races, male, female, white, black, into one band, and were the cream of the crop of the Woodstock Music Festival. Like, they literally played on a Saturday night, the peak of the Woodstock Festival, and blew everyone away.
And there was also the Summer of Love Festival. Yeah.
And to see a band merge different races into one band is what appealed to me, because it was about inclusion, about letting male, female, white, black, Chinese, anyone into the band is what allured me, and just under the umbrella of funk. And so it changed my life, and to see it grow and then kind of die, but resurgence of the funk with the bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers in the mid-'80s when no one was doing it, and bringing it back to life, and then playing in a band myself for like a decade in a funk band, and that changed my life. And I had to learn and train myself on guitar how to play guitar and then bass, funk bass, joining a Latin band, which I played with a band called Los Morenos for 20 years, and embedding funk bass lines into Latin music, and the fusion of funk music in all genres of music. I just found it fascinating. And the message that funk says is that everyone's invited to the party. And so, even though in hip-hop, as much as I love hip-hop, and there's no instruments being played, mind you, I find DJs to be musicians themselves, but even though musicians aren't playing it, they are sampling old loops of this music. Right? So my whole life has been funk. It's always been around, and it's always been a message of love and harmony, and everyone's invited to the party.
Yeah, that's it's a nice feeling, I feel. And I feel like, when you're at that party and you see people let go, it's like that's that's when I feel people let their guard down.
The ace is thrown, you're all in for too many souls. You're giving up more than you had a right to hold. Got jacked upon the lies from underneath your belt.
As a musician myself, to be put in a position on stage to be able, like especially with the high rollers, to be able to bring funk to the stage and send out the same message to all these people, and look out in the crowd of black, white, a mix of races, men, women, gay, that changes your life. When you're playing to thousands of people just all mixed into one room.
Like it made you feel something when you're playing.
Yeah, it makes you feel good to be able to say everyone was invited to the party. Yeah, and back then it was okay for white people to wear afro wigs at the shows. Nowadays it's like it's not. It doesn't go well these days, and it kind of scares me, because at a time when we were playing, and our band was like white, black, Asian, our horn players was black and white and Asian, and our singer was Asian, and we were all just a mixed bag. Some some white guys had dreadlocks, some white guys were wearing, like it was just, that's pretty much what would like to achieve in my life, is to see that happen.
I think, the challenging thing with the Afro, and I'm not trying to like be inappropriate, but a lot of different types of people have Afros,
especially white people. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying all kinds of people have Afros, so maybe that should be an episode. Hair is a very, as you know, like we all have it's an expression. It's a form of expression, right? If you were to look at yourself, okay, like I'm passing this on to, like you have a son, right? 10 years old, 11 years old.
Quincy, yeah.
In terms of like the next generation, or even musicians now, is there, or anyone, what would you like to see, like from today moving forward, in terms of like a message to send to the people about funk, and like what, the effects that it's had on you, and what you've seen, how it's affected community? What would you like to share?
Well, I'd like to see more of, there are funk musicians today, thank God, because there was a time years ago where I was thinking, I think it's done, it's gone, and
remember, you know what, Marv, I remember you would sit there and be all sad. You're like, funk is yeah, I remember
funk
it.
Is a dead art. Funk is a dead art form.
Yeah,
funk isn't sad. Funk isn't a if there were record stores, they're coming back now, but back then record stores were vanishing, and when there were record stores, you'd see the categories, and funk wasn't even a category anymore. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's kind of scares you, and you want to see that category grow. But in the past decade, there's been some great funk coming out, like Nile Rodgers from Chic has had a comeback with Daft Punk. Pharrell is great. Anderson .Paak. What's the duo? Silk Sonic, Anderson .Paak, and what's his name?
Andre 3000? No, Mac Miller? Sorry. I'm so sorry. Bruno.
Yes, Bruno Mars. Like that to me, when I see that, it gives me hope. I'm just like, oh, I feel like we're bringing that sort of Motown sound back, and we're, it's coming back again, and in the forefront, like in mainstream music.
Yeah.
So, but what I'd like to see are more people, and especially black music. I'd like to see more black musicians, because recently now the trend is DJ and rapping, and that's fine with me. I love it, but I'd like to see more instrumentation and playing like funk riffs and using more horns, and just going, and we can call it retro if you want, but if that's what it takes, then let's bring it back.
Sorry, you said black. Do you mean specifically black people?
Yeah, black people. I need to see more.
Why?
I just think I think black culture.
Like Chili Peppers.
Yeah, I'd like to see black. I'd like to see black culture lean in more instrumentation than rapping, because that seems to be the thing these days, and I love rap. Ever since a group called The Last Poets, I've loved rap, and I just like to see more black musicians playing instruments, and I'm sure they're there. Like, I'm just saying in mainstream.
I see
them. There's a band called The Internet with Sid the Kid, and I love seeing that they're all playing their instruments and singing, and I think that's what I'd like to see change more, is more instrumentation.
I see. You mean like people playing instruments?
Yes.
Yeah, I must say, and like just this past weekend when Ravi was visiting and you were playing with Sargent and Conrad, I love it. I love the band. I love having the drummer and Tori playing guitar, and of course the horns and the bass, and
Like Tori, our guitar player, he's like this cool white guy, and he's one of the funkiest guitar players I've ever met in my life.
I really enjoy watching Tori. He's just like super talented, and the sound. I love this sound. Whatever, I don't even know what you call it, but the style of the sounds that come out of that guitar is very soulful, very funky, and super low key. No flash, just all groove.
That's what I'd like to see. I'd like to hear more funk, and I'd like to hear more meaning in the lyrics for unity in the lyrics.
Right.
Would you say? And I feel like funk has been recently been looped, and a lot of rappers singing over top are singing a lot about themselves and how cool they are, and I'd like to see more lyrics, like what funk used to be back in the day, a little bit more political and socially conscious and spread love.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I feel like if you were to go back to the lyrics, especially in those times where, like, I think the people creating the music were going through different times and were really fighting for something. And I'm not saying people aren't now. I'm not saying people aren't doing that now. I would say when you're speaking about the lyrics, and it was a different time, right? It was a different time. I feel like maybe it was
Today's a different time too. We're supposed to move forward.
Yeah.
And if we're moving forward, then funk should be a part of moving forward.
Right. Evolution. Yeah. Evolving. Anything else before we sign off? I really appreciate you spending time with me here and contributing your perspectives.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Are you going to play some funk music? Sure.
Flytrap.
And you're welcome to play one of my songs too.
Well, yeah, that's what we're going to do for like the intro, outro, and stuff like that. Okay.
I'm The Fly, and I have a band called Flytrap. And I'm also in a band called Sergeant Comrade. Check them out.
Okay, thanks. Peace. And cut.
Your polished groove and all your moves calculate perfectly. You walk with ease and easily portray sagacity. Your weather's false with no remorse, you speak sarcastically. With every breath towards the ground, you're looking down on me. Your paradoxal and illogical with reason. Your purpose lies within your lies, yet you believe on. How many voices did you take to hunt such hatred in your veins? It causes utter innocence you claim.